from those armies go to China to study at Chinese academies for foreign officers. They go to the United States to study, okay, at U.S. bases for foreign officers or U.S. institutes for foreign officers. Mm-hmm. Another example would be Chinese UN peacekeeping troops. These guard refugees camps, as well as Chinese oil facilities in Africa. And I'd say about a half a dozen at least troops have been killed in guarding refugee camps, and many dozens of more have been wounded. The final example would be Chinese troops who are designated to monitor potential terrorists passing from China into Afghanistan and from Afghanistan into China. You know that Afghanistan has a little finger-sized prong of Afghanistan goes into China. Okay? And so the Chinese have set up troops in Tajikistan, I believe it's Tajikistan, which is just north of that area, as well as within Afghanistan. Now, they'll deny it, you know. Everybody on every side will deny it. But newspaper reporters have found Chinese troops and interviewed a few that would be willing to say more than a hello to them, okay, in those countries. And of course the U.S. knows, because the U.S. has satellites, right? And they can detect Chinese bases, even small ones, right, in that area. There's denial, and then there's anti-denial, put it that way.
That's what is all that fighting.
Let's listen to Marilyn lecture us.
Okay. Jumping ahead, I'll skip a few things. All of these kinds of expeditions abroad are important to the Chinese because they give the Army and Navy practice in combat or near combat situations that make up for the debilitating deficiencies in those areas. Armies, navies, air forces, which do not engage in combat, get lazy. Their military exercise becomes showpieces. Their officers become more concerned about building up their prestige, their perks, and in China especially, doing things like selling ranks to lower officers. Okay? More so than that, than being concerned about training to fight. But if they are in, say, UN peacekeeping forces, or if they are abroad, say, in like Afghanistan, they get either combat or near combat training. Okay? So that keeps them on the ball. Of course, the United States is no problem. I mean, one reason why that they're so advanced in a lot of things is because they're in combat all the time everywhere. You know, but some countries, they're not, and China especially. Okay? And that leads really to the next and current leader. Xi Jinping, from 2014 to God knows how long. And his idea of China's common dream. The common dream is to make China great again. Really? China was probably the leading world's country economically, socially, et cetera, up until, for at least several thousand years. It says 3,000 years. Up until about 1840, when the colonial powers began to move in, the Opium War came along, the Chinese dynasty was corrupt and crumbled, okay? And China went down. Yeah. So there's a great thing about going back to where China was and picking up from there and carrying on. And that is Xi Jinping's focus, internationally, of course, and internally. So that by 2050, and you notice how closely this follows the primary stage of socialism phases. So by 2050, he says, China should be an advanced, quote, an advanced socialist country with high living standards, a more democratic political system, and a world-class military, unquote. Over the next 25 years, that means creating a China which is more impenetrable to foreign attack. Okay? Not invasion of the mainland, but foreign attack by air and sea and from space.
And electronically.
What's called anti-access, anti-denial, or in military terms, they just say A2D, and you're supposed to know right away. It's to create an A2D zone by completing the defensive move offshore, not just to the South China Sea, which is the big focus, okay, but beyond that. I might quickly add all the islands that are being built up along the South China Sea and weapons and so forth. This is largely as a statement of political ownership. It's not primarily military. Okay? In most of those islands, 2 cruise missiles could sink those islands, and islets, I-S-L-E-T-S, islets, the little thing could sink them right back into the ocean. Okay, so it's not the military stuff. The United States is not going to invade those islands because they know that if they invade those islands, the same thing would happen to them. Right? But it's not just the South China Sea area, but it's beyond to the so-called 2-island chain. That is, they want anti-access, impenetrability, the 2-island chain. The first island chain is the one it's a line from about Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines. Goes out to that area. The second island chain, okay, really gets into what the United States considers the heart of its lake. And that would be a line that goes approximately from Alaska down through Guam and through Hainan Island in Vietnam. That goes out about 1,500 kilometers. The 2 chains are viewed as a seawall to prevent the United States from blocking China's eastern sea lanes. Secondly, the expansion is to defend against the 2 U.S. strategies against China. The first being air-sea battle, the second being sea-air blockade. Air-sea battle is the use of naval, air, and space attacks on China's military and economic targets. The sea air blockade strategy would be to prevent China's maritime and air transport from access to China. And I should say that any, not just China's sea and air transport, but any sea and air transport getting into China. Okay? You notice there's nothing in the U.S. strategy that talks about land warfare. Nothing. Not that the Army isn't pushing for certain things, but that's a different story. If you look at the Belton Road project, okay, is China moving its commercial line all the way through to Europe. If you look at the Belton Road is really a strategy to counter the U.S. move to Asia Pacific. I've said this for years. I just read the other day where a Chinese general said it, and I'm glad he's thinking the same way I'm thinking. But actually, it's more. It's more. That is U.S. strategy. It's not just a Pacific to Asia Pacific. In the last year or two, it's beyond that. You notice what they're calling it nowadays? The Indo-Pacific strategy. Just off the press. I just got it 2 weeks ago from the government, U.S. government publication, detailing how the United States has to move into the Indian Ocean, how the United States has to find allies not just in East Asia, but Southeast Asia and South Asia. Right? But that is where the future conflicts will occur, all right? Not just in the Pacific, but beyond it. Interesting. Maybe one day I could discuss this, because it's too lengthy to discuss now, but it's very interesting with the U.S., the details, which just goes on U.S. policy.
Does that derive from the pivot that we've been reading about for years now?
Derived from the what?
Pivot. From the pivot to Asia.
Yeah, that's beyond the pivot to Asia.
Right.
Yeah, the pivot to Asia then, as China begins to move on land and sea more towards throughout Asia into Europe, then this starts moving. The main focus for China against war is deterrence. Deterrence. I say the reason being, of course, that China is in no position to defeat the United States in a head-to-head war. Almost through. I'll stop. I'll stop. I mean, there's more, but I'll stop.
Would you repeat the title of your presentation so we can kind of organize our thinking about how to relate to what you've been talking about?
The title?
Yeah. The title of your presentation as far as you're concerned. China.
China's political,
It's in the main
ideological China's political military strategy.
Okay.
30 years from the past, 30 years into the future.
Right, right.
All you need to do is go online.
No, I
It's
know.
online, so
I
you
just
don't need
wanted-
to take up time now.
I
You have
didn't
limited
want
time.
to take up any time.
Well, you're taking up
No,
time.
you didn't have to answer and she didn't have to answer. He does a good job.
Okay, we have another very important thing before we can proceed, and that